Okay, welcome to Sphere Practice. I'm going to film this video a little bit differently than my other videos, uh, meaning you can see the green screen behind me because I'm using a picture-in-picture because I'm going to use the camera to do a demo on a sphere. So for this lesson, we're doing a sphere practice, and I wanted to show you guys a couple of things that happened and how we approach to drawing a sphere and how the physics of light comes into play and how you have to understand the physics of light in order to accurately render a sphere onto a paper. So this is, I just took it this morning before I started class, and I use a single light that's up above, and I have this on my desktop. And what you're going to see is you're going to see this kind of crescent shape that goes from here all the way up to here, and you have a really dark core shadow, and that's mainly because you got a lot of light bouncing back. So you're not going to get that nice dark crescent right over here. Underneath, what you're going to have is what we call reflected light. That's light that comes past the apex and then bounces back up. So it's coming down past the apex, which is right here, hits the table, and then comes back. Now, how much reflected light you have depends on the surface that it is bouncing off of. So in this case, it is a white surface, and then you can see the casted shadow. If it was bouncing off a black surface, which I'm going to show you, um, you won't get as big of a change in that light down here, the reflected light. It's going to resemble more of the shadow. The other thing to notice is everything's opposite. So you have the light source coming here and the direct light hitting the sphere at this point. Well, opposite is going to be your core shadow. Opposite of that light still, you're going to see the reflected light, and then you're going to see the casted shadow. So here's the light over here. Everything else is opposite directly across of it. Now, when you are indicating your light source in your drawing, so every time I do a sketch, I always indicate where my light source is, especially on the demos, because that's going to give you an idea of where everything goes. So let's look at my desktop, and you're going to see I have a sphere there. Let me turn this over. So here's the sphere. And the problem with this sphere is you're seeing the camera coming straight down and the lights over there. So you don't really have a good idea of what I'm talking about from this angle. However, you can clearly see that nice crescent core shadow. You can see the reflected light, and then you can also see the casted shadow, and the light's coming directly from here. Okay, so you're seeing the sharp angle simply because the camera's pointing straight down. So I'm going to use this camera. Excuse me. And I'm going to point it at it, and we're going to see it at different angles. So when we look at it, now you're looking almost directly even to the sphere, and you're going to see that core shadow much higher. But as I move my angle up, you're going to see the core shadow is going to get bigger, and it's going to move lower on the picture plane. And as I keep going, it's going to keep going up. Okay. Now here you can really see that strong crescent. I'm just going to move it down just a bit. And it's important to see how that light interacts. Now what I'm going to do is I'm going to take this piece of paper out of the way, and I'm going to put that sphere. Now you can see that you're really not getting a whole lot of reflected light. It's still there, right? You can see it down there. Here you have a nice strong core shadow, and then you're getting some of that reflected light, and you're going to see my hand come in. And as my hand comes in, you're going to see that like orangish reflective light color, and that's coming off my flesh. Okay, so anything that light can bounce off of, it's going to, and that's going to change those values. So I'm going to pull out just a little bit so you guys can see it. I'm going to come up above so you guys can see that, and then I'm going to come a little bit lower. Okay. You can also see what happens to the overall color when you have a black surface and you don't have a lot of light hitting it. So if I come back to this, sorry for that little trip. So when you come back to this now, if I put a piece of paper underneath here, you're going to see that it looks much lighter because you got more light bouncing. Okay, so we're going to take all this stuff off, and what we're going to do is I'm going to show you guys a couple of things to look for while we're doing this. So I'm going to put some circles down. And at this time, what you can do is you can make sure you have some paper and a pen, something to take notes with. And if you don't, just pause the video right now. So the other reason I'm not putting the light above me, and I could turn this light on a bit so you guys can see me a little bit easier, is if I have this light on above me, you're not really going to be able to see a lot of the details here. And I want you guys to be able to see that details fairly clearly. So let's start with this. And I'm going to use some colored pens so you guys can, visually see it. I'm also going to zoom in and let me shrink myself a bit. Okay. And I'm just going to zoom in so you guys can see this a little clearer. You're going to get some banding, and that's on the filming part, simply because I don't have enough light for the camera. But when I put too much light, hopefully it settles down. When I put too much light, you're not going to be able to see this stuff down here. So first thing I'm going to do is I'm going to do what I told you guys. I'm going to put my light source. Okay, so there's my light source. And light only travels in one direction. It travels in a straight line. It doesn't bend, it doesn't warp, it doesn't wrap. So when you're doing this, I'm going to put some vectors down. Okay. And then I'm going to put just another one to indicate light here. Now, it's important to understand that when you're dealing with the sphere, a sphere is a completely round object. It's round in every direction. So we have to indicate that. When light hits the sphere, light's going to hit a circular object and it's going to have a circular appearance. So I'm just going to indicate this as my direct light. Okay, so this is going to be my direct light. And light travels in all directions. This is called omnidirection when it goes everywhere. I'm just going to put some arrows down so you guys can see it. Okay, and I apologize for the banding that you might see in the film, because it's either that or you don't see this very well. The next thing I'm going to do is I'm going to indicate the curves going this way on the sphere. So I'm just going to put a little diagram down that shows I have a curved object. Okay, so there's my diagram. I'm going to make this a little bit darker. So we want to understand. Now, this point is what we call the apex. This is the widest part of the sphere where those rays are going to hit, and they're going to be equal to each other. So it's going to hit both sides. There's going to be a line that can go right between the two of them. The other thing is I'm going to indicate the curve coming around. Okay, so this is a sphere, so there's going to be a curve. And I'm just drawing a series of these curves. Now, one thing I want to point out, and this has to do with the shape of a sphere, Make sure you guys can see those. As I indicate the curves going around, you're going to see that you're going to start seeing a crescent shape. Okay, that crescent shape is that core shadow. And this is why when we draw our core shadows, I'm just going to fill this one in, but I'm not going to do it too dark. This is why you start seeing a core shadow anytime you are looking at a sphere that's under a direct light. Okay, you see that crescent shape, the light's hitting it. The thinnest part of the shadow is going to be at the apex. The fattest part's going to be at the opposite. And what we're saying is this point right here is the apex. So this section right here is the same as these two lines. And that's the apex pointing at us. And that's always where the deepest shadow is going to be, right at that point. The other thing you're going to see is you're going to have a gap here, and that's going to be from the reflected light bouncing up. And that's why you get that thin crescent. So this is reflected light. So make sure in your notes you're putting this stuff down. Don't try to remember everything. Have a nice diagram and nice notes so you can fully understand how light is interacting with not just the sphere, but the surface that the sphere is sitting on. So this is the crescent shape. So let me indicate that. And the crescent shape, we're exaggerating it in our demos. If you put a sphere in front of you or something that's sphere-like, like an onion, you want to draw the shadows as you see them. And those shadows are all going to change depending on the environment in which that object's in. So I'm just going to go here and I'm going to indicate this crescent shape. And what we call this crescent shape, this darkest shadow that you see, let me fill it in a bit. We refer to this as your core shadow. So in illustration or rendering, any videos you might watch, anytime someone's talking about a core shadow, they're talking about the darkest part of the shadow and the thickest part of the shadow. That's the shadow, darkest part. Everything else is a mid-tone going towards the light source. And then let's also diagram what this is. So this represents our direct light. Okay, so I'm just putting this out. And it's important to label. I'm sorry, my pen's acting up. So that's supposed to be an R, right? Direct light. This pen decided to act up right where the R was at. Now we're going to go to our other one. We're also going to create another diagram. We're going to talk about how we do our shadows and how we interact. So I'm going to put my light source here. So there's my light source. I'm going to label it. Okay, and then we're going to go over a couple of more notes. And I'm going to look at it and draw my vector. Now when you're rendering, you're not going to draw all of this. This is just for note taking. Okay. So I'm going to do another video where we render the sphere, I'm sorry. But when we do it, you're not going to have all these notes. What I do generally do though, unless I'm trying to do like a really nice presentation one, like the final, I tend to put my light source in. If I'm going to do something nice and I want to make a really nice rendered sphere, I'll put a very light mark that I can erase later. And that just gives me my visual cues. So I always want to have a visual cue of where I'm shading so I don't get lost. And that's what that light source does for me. So first thing I'm going to do is I'm going to indicate where my direct light's hitting. Okay, so I'm just going to draw this in. So I'm going to say that's my direct light. I'm going to put my little arrows in so you guys can understand what that reference. By this time, you should know that this little diagram represents direct light. And I'm going to put a 1 in there. Okay. I'm also going to indicate a crescent shape, and I'm going to put my crescent shape here. And here's the important thing. You're just going to go opposite, like I talked about earlier in the video. I'm going to go opposite of my light source. That's where my crescent's going to go. And I'm just going to indicate this is where my crescent's going to go. I can't go past this point. So you can't go past this point right here. Let me put the indication down. So here's the apex. There's that apex. Okay, you can't go past those points when you're doing your crescent because light's going to be hitting there. If light's hitting there, there's not going to be a shadow. The shadow's going to be right underneath it. So I'm just going to indicate this right down here. And then I'm just going to go in and shade my crescent shape. Now, when I say crescent shape, I'm oversimplifying it, right? It has an appearance of a crescent, but it's not going to be like those cartoon crescent shapes that you see like for the moon and stuff like that. Okay, so there's going to be my core shadow. And we saw this when we were drawing and doing our diagrams. So I'm also going to put a 2, a 3, okay? And this right here is going to be my direct light. And I'm giving that a value. So we're talking about values. I'm giving that a value of 1. My midtones are going to be 2 and 3. Okay, so 2 being closest to the light source, 3 going into the shadow. My core shadow is going to be a 6. Okay, so if we do a value scale of 1 to 6, 6 is going to be my darkest value. Now, my reflected light is going to be a 4 or 5. Okay, now why would I say a 4 or 5? Well, it's simple. If my sphere is sitting on a light surface, you're going to get a much brighter reflected light. If it's sitting on a dark surface, you're barely going to notice that there's a reflected light. It's going to be closer to the core shadow, the color. So if I have this on a light surface and I want to show really nice reflected light, I simply say, okay, the tabletop or whatever it's sitting on is going to be a lighter value. So that's why that's going to be a 4 or a 5, because it depends on what the light's bouncing off of. So we're going to say the light's bouncing off a lighter surface. We're going with the 4, and it's going to probably go closer to a 3 if it's like a white table. But if you have like a light brown wooden table, it'll probably be more of a true 4. And if you have something dark, not necessarily black, but dark, like a dark wood, you're probably going to be closer to the 5. Okay. So that's why we have our value scale there. That's why I'm putting it down, and that's why I'm explaining it. So you understand light is interacting with the environment. We need to understand that. And then let's look at a couple common mistakes that people do when they're drawing. One of the biggest mistakes I have students drawing every single year is when they draw their core shadow. Okay, we're going to talk core shadow. I get the upsilon. I get that Greek letter upsilon or U, and I get this. Your core shadow can't be this way. Your shadows are leading straight up. This is a round sphere. Your shadows, and let me draw a little circle around this. Okay. See how my shadows are leaving that circle? No matter how well you render and shade this, it's never going to look right. It's always going to look weird because this is not how the sphere is going to interact with light. We don't see round objects have a U shadow or a U-shaped core shadow. It doesn't happen. It's physically not possible. Okay, so that breaks the illusion and this will never look correctly. So this is one of the biggest mistakes I get from students. I'm just going to put here and put no. Okay, when you're drawing your crescent, and especially if you're just practicing, so you're making up your light source, you're making up your shadow, it's important that your crescent shape looks like, if you were to finish drawing the whole shape, that it would form a circle or a sphere. Okay, so it shouldn't look like it's going to come off the paper. So when you look at it, it should look like, okay, if I put a circle around this, okay, it's going to look like I'm sorry, oops, that circle's not very good. But it should look like it's just going to continue to form a circle, okay? So this would be a yes. So we're talking about our core shadows, all right? So we want to avoid the oops, the oopsilon. That's why I call it an oopsilon. So we want to avoid that oops. We want to avoid that U. We want to keep it a true crescent shape, a two crescent shape, okay? The other thing I want to point out, I'm just going to draw another circle over here. Okay. The other thing you want to avoid is you want to avoid shading in one direction or shading flat. So if I come here and I put my lines here and say I'm going to shade, no matter how great I shade, that's always going to appear flat. Okay, so this is lines moving in one direction. Okay, so lines moving one direction is always going to equal flat. We don't want to do that. Now, what I ask my students, can I make a curve with straight lines? Can I make a curve with straight lines? And I just sit back and I wait for the reaction and I wait for, yes or no. I had a couple of students think about it and they got it correct. So I had two students who were absolutely correct when I looked at my chat earlier with my class. And they said, well, if you change the angles, yeah. And that's the correct answer. So if I come in here and I draw a series of straight lines, those are straight. And then I come in and I start to change those angles. You're going to see that I'm going to get a curved object. Okay. And we do that with our hands all the time. Our fingers are straight. The bones are straight, right? All our bones are straight. But once we start curving and changing our angles, we can get a curve, right? We do it all the time. When we say, okay, right? We're doing it all the time. Okay. All we're doing is taking straight bones and changing their angles and we can see a curve. It's important to understand this because in the next video, I'm going to show you how to render it. when we're attacking our values and shading, we are going to be attacking it at multiple angles. And we're going to be attacking multiple angles going this way and this way towards the light. And that can be very difficult to grasp at first. So it's important to understand the principle that when we change we're going to be changing our angles. Here's the other problem I have. When I start shading and blending, and we talked about this earlier, the more times you go over graphite, so pencil, the more times you go over an area, you go over it and go over it and go over it, it's going to get smoother and smoother and smoother. It's going to blend. Well, the nice thing is when you do that with the sphere, you get a nicely rendered sphere. The bad part is you lose some of the line that you see curving. You just lose it, right? You see it done and finished and it looks nice, but you can't see the process. So usually what I do is I do one in ink, because the ink I can't blend, and you'll see the changes in angles and how it's done. And then I do one or two nice ones in pencils. So for the next video, I'm going to demo how to render it, and then I'm going to speed it up a bit so that people don't have to watch the 20-minute process, the 30-minute process of doing a small sphere. Something this size to do nicely can take 20-25 minutes. If I do it really quickly and sloppy, probably about 10 to 12 minutes. And so I'm going to make another video coming up after this, and that's it. So I will talk to you guys later. This is our sphere practice for today.